This month is Brain Injury Awareness Month. I'm chatting to Ollie, a colleague, friend, and fellow brain injury survivor. So let's start off at the beginning. So I had my hemorrhagic strokes in 2020, followed by brain surgery to remove the cavernoma that I had in my brainstem. My first strokes gave me kind of warning signs for about a week before I developed weakness on one side of my body. But with my second stroke, I woke up in the middle of the night, tried to get up, and literally collapsed. And the rest is history. So, Ollie, can you tell me about your brain injury?
Yeah, sure. So, I was actually during the day actually just working at a client's property offices. Bit of a headache. Didn't Nothing much more of it. Made the journey back home, which was about an hour and a half journey. Got home, felt well. Actually, to be honest with you, I can't remember getting home. Is the honest answer. I apparently got home and we felt that I'd had the mother of all migraines. So I suffered from migraines very badly. And yeah, it turned out that it was a stroke or a brain bleed or an aneurysm, however, or hemorrhage, however you
Yeah,
like to label it, I guess.
there's quite a few, isn't there?
Yeah, I feel like I name it differently every time I I mention it. So yeah, my wife literally had to force the paramedics to take me to hospital because they felt it was just migraines, and they took me to the local hospital. They said yes, had a stroke, put me in a stroke ward, where the bleed then got into a massive clot. So I was rushed to the regional hospital, which is Southmead in Bristol, and they, yeah, operated the next morning to take it out. So
I mean, it's funny that you said that you can't really remember getting home because actually, on the day of my stroke, I was driving, and I was actually driving with my son, which
mm,
now thinking back makes me feel quite sick.
mm,
And but I said to him, something just doesn't feel right.
mm,
And he said, "What do you mean?" I was like, I can't explain it, but it
mm,
was like I wasn't in control of that car. It was just kind of
mm,
happening. So I actually had to kind of pull over. So
mm.
it's weird that we both had kind of exactly the same experience.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I felt like I really had to get home quickly,
Mm.
and there was no time constraints to my journey, but I felt like in a massive rush to get home.
Be safe,
And then when I
probably.
did yeah, absolutely. And then when I did get home, my wife was then I was very morbid and so she was like, this is not right because I'm not, normally, I'm usually quite bubbly and thing, but she said you're
Mm.
very, very morbid. So she knew something was not quite right, should we say. So it was
And I had migraines as well beforehand, and I
mm,
actually got fobbed off by a GP who said that it was stress and I needed counselling, and I said I don't
mm,
need
yeah.
counselling. It's personally the difference
Mm,
between a stress tension headache
mm,
and a headache because something's going on in your brain, but it's so hard for other people, I suppose,
mm.
to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to have migraines, and they're not nice. I'm sure people know, and you do have those symptoms, but not to the level of I was having. And strangely enough, after I've had the hemorrhage, I've not had any migraines since. So whether that was I don't know, whether that was a some sort of early warning,
Mm.
right? Years and beforehand, who knows? But I guess the positive is I don't get migraines anymore. So
That is very positive, because I still get headaches, and I'll be honest, every time I get a headache, I have that kind of moment of being back where I was, kind of
Mm.
thinking, is this headache going to get any worse?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that always kind of plays on my mind
Mm.
when my head kicks in now.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's hard to get away from that, isn't it?
So realizing what happened to me, I'll be honest, made me feel really lonely and confused, and put me in a pretty dark place. After the first 4 months of kind of rehab, and I had the second stroke, I was tired of fighting, I'll be honest, but yet
Yeah.
fighting is the only option you're given in those situations. And
Yeah.
it when someone asks me to try and explain it, I do struggle, but I find it was like I was lost in a familiar world. Like
Hmm.
I everything I remembered, yet everything was different to how I remembered it.
Hmm.
And my sharp brain, that well, I felt a sharp brain that could multitask or work in stressful situations, kind of went offline, and I rebooted with a
Yeah.
brain that was suddenly unable to complete just simple tasks.
Mm.
Do you think if you could explain what the realization was like for you, how would you?
Uh, I mean, I find it an ongoing process, I guess. I mean, even uh, from the process, from the surgery, from the waking up process, uh, I was completely unaware from even where I was, and the doctors and things were trying to say where, asking me where I was and what
Yeah,
was the
that constant question. What's the date?
yeah,
Where are
exactly.
you?
And the thing is that they moved me, so I didn't have any idea where I was. So the funny thing is that my wife actually brought in a cuddly toy with the name Bristol on there, which she put on the end of my bed. Which, so when they asked, I could say Bristol, because I mean, to be honest, I couldn't even remember that there's a bloody toy there anyway. But the principle was really good. Uh, I think that the realization, from that on to when I know I left hospital very quickly. Within I was in hospital from start to finish. I was at 18 days, uh, and which sounds really great, and it was, because they were talking months of therapy and stuff like that. But then you kind of, in a way, you lose the almost realization of what's happened, because I came home, and there was no real follow-up care. So I was there with someone who had a lot of, I guess, needs,
Mm.
but who looked like I was absolutely fine. All the doctors said I looked absolutely perfect. I could walk, I had a smile, but my brain was just like like that.
Yeah.
And it's not got any better. To be both honest with you now, but I should probably hide it better. But uh, and that's it's hard when, I guess, that realization,
Mm.
a few weeks later, when I was trying to spell, for example, and I couldn't even understand letters and numbers to that level, and I had to literally go through that whole process, and it's yeah, it's hard. It's hard to uh, it's hard to get your head around it, I think.
I think
And
perhaps in hospital you have that kind of that comfort blanket a little
I miss
bit.
it, actually.
You're on like you say, a stroke ward or a neuro ward,
Mm,
and everyone knows you might need a bit more time or
mm,
kind of help you. Whereas as soon as you want to be home 100%, and I certainly want to be home because I hadn't seen my husband or kids for bloody ages.
mm,
But um there's something about going back to a life that you are now a different person, and
Mm,
kind of trying to, in a way, pick up where you left off without
mm,
that kind of comfort blanket, and
yeah.
knowing you're on your own to a certain
Mm,
extent. I mean, I had therapy, like physiotherapy and OT and speech and language for years, and actually I
mm,
still do physiotherapy even now, 4 years on. But it's not the same when you're at home, and your wife or my husband, they want to kind of wrap you up in a blanket a little bit,
mm,
but they can't understand what's going on. That, as much as you can have the best husband or best
mm,
wife in the world, it it it's really hard to try and explain your brain. Well, I
mm,
certainly find it hard to explain my brain, and I don't think anyone other than someone who's had a brain injury would understand how difficult
mm.
that is.
Oh, 100%. I think, as you said, my wife is absolutely amazing. My family, my friends, you know, my colleagues, more importantly, yourself and my friends, are, are brilliant. But
Mm,
no one, no one really understands the the difference it makes, because you're right. It's, for me, it's I guess you for me, I could be in a whole room of people who absolutely adore me and think I'm brilliant, and wow, you're a lovely bloke, you're the best marketer in the world, you're funny, you're, oh wow, and I could still feel so lonely. And that's not because I'm depressed, or not because I'm needy or anything like
yeah,
that. It's because there's just I've just had a brain damage. That's it.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And
yeah,
and that's just the reality. And and yeah, people, you know, that's just how it is. And I think the people who know the situation know that they won't fully
mm,
understand as much as they'd probably like to. And I would love everyone to. I'd love to everyone to, as you would,
yeah,
fully get the torture that sometimes happens. But
yeah.
you know, hey, it's
We can only explain as well as we can, I think.
yeah.
I mean, for me, kind of living with the brain injury now, once the kind of realization and kind of scary moment was done,
Mhm,
for me, I kind of feel sometimes a little bit like a prisoner. My body's a prisoner to a brain that I don't recognize nor like half the time. And
mm,
to be honest, a brain that actually bloody scares me because
mm,
of um how difficult things are, and every day is hard. Every act, everything you do is so much harder, and
mm,
it is exhausting to constantly try and fight with a brain that you just don't recognize, I
mm,
think.
yeah.
If you could, you describe what living with a brain injury is like now?
I think for me, I think it's uh, sometimes it feels literally like you're whacking your head against a brick wall. I think
Mm,
it's the little things, I guess, that I find, for me personally, I find so hard that cause kind of so much, almost upset. Well, no, not just
yeah,
definite upset,
yeah,
because I'm 46 years old. I like to think that I'm not completely stupid in life, but
100% on that.
but
But I get,
some of the things that you know I find are like, how the hell do you like open a jar? You know,
mm,
I
yeah,
mean, I've been in in the kitchen trying to open this jar to the point where something's going to go through the window in a minute. It's either me or the jar, and
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be that hard. But for me, it's like some sort of Rubik's cube, and it's
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
and kind of Kerry would come in and just do it like that. And for that moment, you feel like an absolute muppet. That's the
You do,
only way.
yeah.
It sounds horrible, but and that's you just go through that about 1,000 times a day, because the little logical things that are what everyone's brain is, but it doesn't work, and
Yeah.
they just add up.
Yeah.
And
Whacking your head against a wall is a perfect, analogy, because that's what you do. Like, everything that should be simple, it isn't suddenly, and you're constantly kind of going, I should be able to do this. And in a way, you said stupid, but I kind of feel a bit of shame. Like,
oh,
you know,
massively.
I should be able to do this, and I can't, and I'm actually quite ashamed a lot of the time
Yeah.
of how seemingly simple things sometimes, some days, and that's the thing, it fluctuates, right? So one day that jar that you mentioned wouldn't be a problem. I'd be opening 10 jars back to back with that, but then all it takes is something in your brain to kind of switch off or something, and the next day you can't do that. And I think it must be hard for carers or husbands, wives, families, even my kids, because they people do think, but you could do that yesterday,
Yeah.
like and it is, for me, shame when my 8-year-old, 9-year-old son has to help me do something that I feel like I should be able, as a mum, I should be able to do,
Yeah.
or as a wife, I should be able to do. So there is a lot of shame of whether your KV2, as I call it, is she's still there, Kay's still there, 100%. But there's this. When I say dark cloud, I don't mean depression or anything like that. What I mean is there's just this kind of constant, kind of heavy blanket over everything that you have to kind of get off before you can get the nugget underneath that you need.
Yeah. I 100%. Yeah, completely get that. I think it's. I always kind of. From literally from day one, I have this thing where, so I won't stop until I get back to 100%. And everyone has always said, well, you're being too hard, really too hard on yourself. You need to give yourself a break. And for me, that's but that's what drove me from to get me kind of
This far.
because at the start it's not an exaggeration where I couldn't talk. I couldn't. I had aphasia, which was a massive issue. I things, letters, numbers, anything. I remember having therapy where this very kind nurse was trying to help me, or wasn't a nurse, it was a therapist. And trying to add like 1 and 6 and feeling like I've done something good. And I was there feeling absolutely humiliated because she thought that was brilliant. And I'm like, I used to be really good at maths. How can and people now say, that I guess I'm very harsh on myself, but I can't feel any form of success on anything that's this until I get back to where I was, because for me, any kind of any form of success feels like we've kind of, in brackets, that's great for someone who's had a brain injury, not that's great because you've done something good. And that's that I guess, that upsets me, and it will continue to upset me, because I guess my bar is I just don't want to be someone who's just average,
Accepting.
accepting,
Yeah,
and which is great, but then that causes a massive amount of conflicts in
yeah.
my own mind anyway. So I guess you know,
Yeah,
it's good and bad. It
absolutely.
probably fries my own brain, but it's got me
This far,
somewhere.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I guess with yourself, it's you know how amazing you've done, but doesn't mean that
doesn't mean I feel it
it's
because it's
only
not
feeling.
amazing to what I would do before.
Yeah,
It's always still substandard, in my opinion,
yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
I think that's something that you will always, I suppose, live with a brain injury, and unless you are very lucky and can get to
Mm,
that 100%, and you have to strive to get there because you need that motivation because, like you say, you wouldn't be where you are now if it wasn't
mm,
for that motivation. But
yeah,
that hunger to get to 100% and not be anything less means that everything you do, you never feel good about yourself for doing. You feel,
mm,
like you say, it's always with a caveat for someone who's had a brain injury.
yeah, exactly. And that's I guess that's for people who don't have a brain injury, they probably think that's quite sad that
Mm,
someone who, or two people who've, they would say, done really well to actually survive the first few weeks, which is never a guarantee, and then carry on their lives and doing
mm.
well. But yeah, it's that's I guess that's the part of a brain injury, isn't it? It changes things, and sad but true. So
What do you think you find most difficult in kind of day-to-day activities apart from jar opening, as we now know?
jar opening, yeah, uh, yeah. The jar opening is uh, yeah. Uh, Obviously, where I had the damages on the left left hand side, so very cognitive, the uh, compromised, I guess I would say. So it's things like uh, I can't really go. I struggle to go out on my own at times. Uh, Physically, I do have a my right leg sometimes decides to go in a different direction to everything else, which is fantastic for viewers who sees someone going that way, then they go that way. But for the person, it's yeah, not great. Uh, so I'm not great with traffic, and uh, I don't really acknowledge cars very well, and just assume that they will stop for me, which is great. Uh, Directional wise, terrible. Uh, Cooking on wise, I am very prone to like leaving the oven on, so
Yeah.
we tend to not. I tend not to cook on my own. So kind of carries around at all times just to make things.
Mm,
So I've just left the cook and the oven on for 4 hours before, and it's you know, and they come back, the chicken's done, and it's things like charcoal, But so we learned from that. Uh, those are the main. Those are the main uh, things. Anything, yeah, main kind of cognitively are not
mm.
are not brilliant, I'd say. Uh, yeah, sometimes my memory's a bit ropey. Uh, so it's hard to always say a list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything can change by one day to the next. So,
Yeah.
what about yourself?
Yeah, cognition 100%. For me, it's simple things like booking things. I always seem to like double book or book on days that I then write down a completely different day and I turn up at the
Mm,
wrong time, and um, just making a lot of kind of simple mistakes when it comes
mm,
to I don't know, making payments online and stuff. But I think, to be honest, the biggest thing that probably impacts me, other than only having one arm, is having the use of one arm, sorry, is neurofatigue. I
yeah.
can, it completely wipes me out. For example, this conversation right now is fantastic, but I know I'm going to suffer later for it.
Yeah.
And I
100%.
think that's probably the hardest part. So,
Mm,
like at work or generally even from a personal perspective, you'll book things for, let's say, tomorrow or for Saturday,
mhm,
but you don't know what you're going to be like tomorrow or
mhm.
what you're going to be like Saturday, and
Yeah.
it's really hard that you feel like it's a bit like you were saying, you achieve something, which is great for someone with a brain injury. It comes down to that, it's fantastic. We're having this conversation now, and you
Mm,
and I both can, but also that's going to come at a compromise where you and I
mm,
are both going to have a kind of nap.
yeah.
Excuse me, for me, put myself in a kind of dark room with nothing going on to kind of get over
Mm,
it.
yeah.
Um, so, I mean, like you say, there's really too many to kind of mention, and you can't
Mm,
really do a list because every day is different.
mm,
And I think the other area that I don't think is discussed enough is really how much your mental health struggles.
mm.
Um, I remember my neuropsychologist said to me that to accept the situation, I had to mourn my former self.
Okay.
So, and kind of put her to bed
Mm,
to accept the new one. And I
mm.
still, to be honest, haven't done that. And I still
No.
struggle to do
Yeah.
that because you always look back to your life 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago and how different it was. Um, so yeah, I never had. I'll be honest, I've never had mental health issues previously,
Mhm,
but the strokes did put me in a kind of very dark place, and I needed to start looking at little things that I was kind of appreciative for, and that's not. I'm sure you got it afterwards. The thing that's not the comments of you should be great. You're alive, you survived. That sort of
yeah.
comments like that don't help.
No.
In my opinion, I think where I managed to kind of pull myself out along with medication is having starting a gratitude diary and just writing little things like
Mm,
2 or 3 things every day that I was kind of grateful for, and some of them were so seemingly stupid, like I cooked dinner without leaving the oven on, or I listened to one of my children reading for 5 minutes, but to
mm.
me that was a big thing.
Yeah,
That
massive.
was
Yeah.
something that I couldn't have done before, as in
Mm,
whilst I was kind of rehabilitating.
yeah.
So I think it's finding those little things that help me show that yes, things are shit. They are shit. There's no way
Mm,
of kind of
mm,
sugarcoating that. But those are the things that I'm kind of grateful for
mhm.
that I can do. So that's really what helped me. I mean, how do you look after your mental health?
Uh, I feel like it's a continuous, ongoing, evolving process. If
Yeah,
I'm uh, entirely honest with you,
yeah,
uh, I am naturally someone who's very positive, and try to be very bubbly and things like that. Um, but times I find it incredibly hard. I mean, really hard. Uh, where I do struggle with things, the brain damage is also caused
Oh,
occasional or not occasional kind of mood swings, I guess.
yeah.
Not kind of so I'm psychotic or I don't think.
Mm,
Well, we'll soon find out. But if there's any police knocking on the door, then you know why. But I get very, very overly happy or a bit too elated, or
yeah.
and then I could get very uh, grumpy,
Mm,
and that's not like over a period of weeks, or that's like in 5 minutes that can
yeah.
jump from one to the other, which
But
is
the
a lot.
aggression in to me is kind of when my brain's going, I've had enough. There's too
Mm,
much kind of going on. I
yeah.
can't process everything. And it can be something really minor, like, I don't know, Stu says to me, "Do you want a coffee?" And I will
Mm,
snap,
mm,
not because I'm angry and I was fine
mm,
before, but
yeah.
there's these moments of, like you say, either real anger or real happiness or
Mm.
real sadness, and it there's no rhyme or reason sometimes, I think.
No, I think you're right. It's probably more. I think if I was to look into it in more thought, it's probably that my brain's just overloaded for that day, and it just can't take uh any more interaction, or which, like you said, with neuro fatigue, it happens so frequently, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Uh, but in terms of mental health aspects, I live on the Isle of Wight, so that's, apart from when it's so bloody cold, which it is at the moment. Uh, it's lovely to get out and about when we can. Uh, I've started a record collection, which is uh, brilliant, expensive, but
Yeah.
uh, which is good. Um, got a couple of dogs. I would love to say that I read, but I find reading
Mm,
incredibly hard, because reading just overwhelms my head. So I can only read like a page at a time, and then, to be honest with you, you'd read, and then by the time you go back, you forgot what you read the first time.
that's
So really,
exactly me.
you got this 400-page book, and you're like page one. You think, oh fucking hell, I've already written it. I've read this about 6 times now, but I can't get to page two. So
I
it's
do listen to audiobooks though, just because I can't read either or retain it. Whereas audiobooks I do find
yeah.
help me personally.
I should look at that more, and I'm starting to get into podcasts and things like that to
Yeah.
move away. Uh, I think sometimes it's easy to be quite stubborn and say that's how I've always done it, so I'm going to carry on doing it, even though you can't do it, and it's absolutely torturing yourself. But it's hard to move away. So uh, yeah, so those kind of things are good.
Yeah, good distraction, but as far as kind of hobbies
Yeah,
go, don't they? They just take you away for a very short amount of time to
yeah.
focus.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I talk to my wife and friends about how I feel, but in some ways, I don't think really talking for me personally helps that much, because
Yeah,
when it comes down to it, it comes to the end of it, and the end of it is I've got brain injury,
yeah,
and there's not a lot else you can really say about it. That's just a reality. I know that. I can rationale that in my own head. That's just the reality of it. So I
yeah.
don't necessarily need millions of people to talk to tell me that. Uh, it's just, you know, sometimes I do. But,
So, if someone's watching this and has a family member who's recently had a stroke or a brain injury, what advice would you give?
uh, I'd say don't give up. Don't be uh, be very strong. I would say I suppose maybe my circumstances were different or unique, but I fear it's probably not. But my wife was not the first hospital I was at. She felt like they weren't really that interested in. She didn't feel I was safe there. So she pushed very, very hard for me to be moved to the regional one, which is Southmead. And luckily they saw something on the thing, so they agreed. And likewise, after my thing, that there was no support because I wasn't repatriated to the first hospital. So she didn't, we had such an amazing GP who put so much effort into getting the support that was available there. So my advice would be to make sure you ask for these things. Don't accept what you've got is all the support you're going to get. Ask these questions, do the research online, find good support groups, not like dopey forums that they're going to freak you out. Look for proper things, find support where you can. Ask your GP, ask us. You can just email us. Anything we can do, we're happily to thing. So I think, and if you can hear my dog, don't get a beagle. So those are my kind of main things. I would say, and be patient. It is hard. I feel my wife has had much worse than I have. Because she puts up with me daily, which I was a pain in the ass beforehand, but now it's thing. How about yourself?
I think listen is probably my biggest thing, to kind of listen to what the person who's had a stroke or a brain injury wants, because it doesn't mean they're going to enjoy the same thing now than they did before. Fatigue is going to kick in the first few weeks after a stroke. You basically just sleep constantly. Anyway, but kind of listen to what they want and educate yourself, because not all brain injuries are the same. Yours and mine are very different, as are every single person's. And I think you as a family, yes, there may be adjustments you need to make in order to kind of help. So really listen, and don't, I think this is my personal bugbear, but when family members say to me, "Oh, don't worry, I've got a bad memory too," or "Oh, don't worry," it invalidates my brain in a way. Don't try and come to perhaps my level. Instead, listen to me and educate yourself. And if that means, like I said, with the fatigue, if that means I can't put up with, the nicest possible, when I say put up, have family members over for 2-3 hours talking at me at a million miles an hour, that's not a personal thing. That's about the family, I suppose, educating themselves on how how the brain injuries affected you, and change that and go, I'm just going to pop in for a quick cup of tea for 5 minutes to let them know they're there, but I'm not going to wear them out, and actually I'm going to make some changes to the way I do things, and not necessarily treat them exactly the same, because of course they are the same, and that's what people want, but it's kind of a two-way street, isn't it?
Definitely. Those are really kind of big things, and certainly the listening and things. I remember when my mum came to stay after I was released, and I
sounds like you've been in prison.
Yeah, I felt like it actually.
Yeah,
And she stayed with us. And yeah, she wasn't quite. She was quite new, or we all were new to this. But whenever I felt like she was getting a bit too much or things like that, I kept on. I just faked sleep and just so
yeah,
and it helped.
yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. That those
And
kind of things.
I've actually had to make some quite hard decisions between like from family and friends of people that I see and who I don't see and who I kind of perhaps distance myself away from because of the fact that they make me so sick from kind of just being with them in the nicest possible way
Yeah.
because they're too intense or they talk too fast or they talk too quickly or they stay for 5 hours without being invited and
Mm.
you're yawning, you're pretending to fall asleep, but yet they keep on. So you have to be a bit selfish, I think, and
Mm.
actually spend time with the people that actually kind of help you
Mhm.
to be your best self and
Mhm.
not be the person that, like we said earlier, that aggression, that snapping, because really all you want to do is go, will you shut up, in
Yeah.
the nicest possible way, because your brain
Mm.
hurts.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
kind of had enough. So if someone's watching and has an employee who's had a brain injury, what advice would you give? Because this is quite hard because obviously both of us are not employed, and in a way, people, you could say that we're lucky in that respect
Yeah.
because we haven't had to go through that kind of process, but also it's harder because you don't have an employer to help you, you know.
Mm.
Um, so if you were employed, what and you had a brain injury, what could an employer do to make things a little bit easier on you?
I would say if they if they were obviously, for example, if they were employed with you beforehand and then
Mm,
had the thing, I would say make sure that they know that you support them 100% is the first thing. Because I was actually working for a company who as a freelancer, and that they tried to they stand by me for a couple of weeks, but ultimately they had to say goodbye, which is
mm,
disappointing but understandable. Uh, but if you're if it's an employee, I say really make sure that they know that they're safe, and there's no issues. It will make a massive difference to like the whole family. I would say that they know they're safe. Uh, a massive amount of flexibility
yeah.
uh, is is needed.
Mm,
You, you can't understand it from their point of view, so I wouldn't even try. But
no.
listen,
Yeah.
uh, and in some ways see it as a positive, as it's crude as it sounds. It's they can add just as much value as before.
Yeah.
That it's not that they're completely useless or things like that. They're going to be. I Although I feel, as I said before, and yourself, sometimes things don't work
Mm,
quite as well, but
yeah.
there's still something going on somewhere.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
on a right day, no, we're all right, aren't
We're
we?
quacking, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right. You need to give the employee as much time as they kind of need
Mm.
without any pressure to kind of be back to that role.
Mm.
I think, so, like we've said earlier, like so much is taken away from you overnight,
Mm.
and don't let work be included in that
Yeah.
because you need that. You still need to be able to be yourself and do your job. You might just need some accommodations. You might need flexible working. You might need to work from home. You might
Yeah.
need a little bit longer on a task, but but that's it. You know that I think anyone, for me, I to get back to work was kind of one of my main goals, just because, like I said, it was taken away from me. I didn't have a choice. And now I do. I want to do that. I want to kind of prove, yes, things might be, I have to maybe be working a different way to how I did before, but I'm still 100% capable of doing my job,
Yeah.
just in a slightly different capacity.
Absolutely. I find, for me personally, I find it very, from the start, it felt like, ironically, the one thing that felt like it was the same. And
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have, obviously, as you said, I have to change how I work, or different hours, or different things. But it's this, for me, it's this little bubble where I kind of partially know what I'm doing. I'm not absolutely terrible at what I do. This is where you say actually, but you know,
You have your
and
days, Ollie.
uh, uh, and it's a good thing for me, and it's a yeah, and I would assume that it would be the same for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I say one more thing. I actually did try to work for a company last year, and the you know they weren't set up for someone to work remotely, and that was a big issue. And for someone who was new to the company, they offered me kind of health insurance, which which is brilliant. Apart from the fact it didn't, I've had a brain surgery, I've had cancer, and I've also got a heart defect because of the thing, and none of those are covered. So it kind of felt a little bit like
If you get a cold, it'll be fine.
But so it's kind of those kind of things where, I'm not saying that a company should go and spend £4 trillion on health insurance, but you know what I mean? It's those kind of the working from home bit. You kind of have to properly invest in doing it properly, I think.
And it's a simple accommodation that can make the world of difference. And companies just need to be educated. They need to have training and realize that every single person is different and every single person works a different way. You can't cookie cut people. That just doesn't work.
No, exactly.
So to close this off, and I think probably this for me is the most important message I like people to take from it. What advice would you give someone who's recently had a brain injury, say to the person themselves?
I feel like to say you've got this. You'll be all right.
Yeah.
Just it's yeah.
Things do get better. You just got to be kind and patient to yourself, right?
Yeah. And yeah. Yeah. I think just keep going. And obviously you will have tough days, but you would have had tough days beforehand.
The tough days get less and less. Admittedly, it takes a long time, but the good days get more and more, don't they?
Yeah. And you're not alone. There's sadly there's probably hundreds of thousands of people who have the same issues, who have gone through the same traumas, and yeah, just keep going.
I think that, again, this is a personal thing for me, but I felt like I was doing so much um for what made other people perhaps happy, that I personally think that you've got a second chance. I've got a V2 of myself, and I'm going to be more selfish, and I'm going to choose what makes me happy and makes my life easier, because it is bloody hard living day in, day out with a brain injury. I don't I have to be selfish and actually cancel those plans. And it's not it, it's not anything kind of personal. It's just a case of I've only got a certain amount of battery life, and I need to use it wisely, and therefore I try to do things that genuinely really do make me happy, and I don't mind them taking all my battery power, because
it's worth it.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, cheers, Ollie. I hope someone listening has gained something valuable from our chat, and
I hope
it's
so.
been wonderful chatting.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much. Thanks for your time.